Could she come in and take a closer look? Weniger invited her in and said that the menorah belonged to his son, and who could perhaps tell her more about it. Weniger went upstairs and called David to come down to talk to the woman. And that is how David found his mother.
Unbelievable. So, 4 years ago, as I was with my son and daughter-in-law, we were on the plane at JFK on our way to Poland. The LL pilot was walking next to me, and he said to me, "Have you ever been to Poland before?" I said, "No." And he said to me just very casually, he said, "You can't really understand Israel until you've gone to Poland." And so, as is usual in the March of the Living, on the last day in Poland is Yom Hashoah. And I got to spend Yom Hashoah with my son and daughter-in-law in Auschwitz. And one of the keynote speakers was Elisha Wiesel. And I'm going to play you his speech, his talk. It's just important for us to hear, because what he does is just, I think, what we all are called upon doing, to take our grief and to extend it to the whole world, to take the grief of other Holocausts and to bring it into our own.
A reading from Devarim. Rak yishomer lecha u'shmor nafshecha me'od, pen tishchach et advarim asher ra'u einecha, ufen yasuru milvavecha, kol yemei chayecha, v'adatam levanecha u'levnei vanecha. But beware and watch yourself well, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw, and lest these things depart from your heart all the days of your life, and you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children. My father never forgot. The things he saw stayed with him all the days of his life. He lived to speak of them to me and to my children. My father was a witness. He was a witness to the worst atrocity that man has ever unleashed on fellow man. And he was a witness who believed that to acknowledge the suffering of another and to have them feel less alone was an imperative for every human being. He spoke for victims around the world: Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur. The thought that genocides could occur in the wake of the Shoah haunted him. But my father was witness to more than the Holocaust. He was a witness to the Jewish lives in Eastern Europe, which it had claimed. He was a witness to his parents' beliefs and their traditions and their values, some of which continued even in this place, even in that time. The father and son saving crusts of bread for each other, to witness the redemption from Egypt. Can you imagine it? Pesach was the last holiday he spent with his family before they were sent here to die, and still he supplemented the direct memory of the horrors he experienced with the ancestral memory of a people given our freedom. He was a witness to a way of life that linked him to his father and to his father's father, and all the way back through the generations. And my father was also a witness to a miracle, the miracle that was the creation of the state of Israel in his time, a Jewish homeland where his sister's children and the Jewish people would never again be left to the world's mercy. He was a witness to all these things. What will you be a witness to? Are you a witness to the crimes that occurred here? Will you be silent While history is in danger of being rewritten, while voices in France are now denying the Vichy government's enthusiasm for the rounding up of Jews? Or will you be a witness that history's lessons are going unheeded when many in both Europe and the United States want to turn away Muslim refugees fleeing chemical warfare in Syria? Will you stand by when African Americans have reason to be terrified of a routine traffic stop? When Christians are slaughtered in Egypt because they are labeled infidels? When girls in Chad, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan are threatened, raped, or shot for pursuing an education? When homosexuality in Iran is a crime that carries the death penalty? Or will you be a witness to those who live in fear because of the color of their skin, or their gender, or their religion, or their non-belief, or their sexual preference? If you are Jewish, will you wait another generation for another Pew report to tell us how Jews are practicing increasingly fewer elements of Judaism in the home, threatening our continued survival as a people with treasured traditions and ethics? Or will you be a witness at the Britot, the bar and bat mitzvahs, the Jewish weddings of your children? Will you say Kaddish for your parents? And will your children say Kaddish for you? And if you are of another faith, will you witness and elevate those elements of your tradition which encourage human rights and dignity, as my father did with his? Will you turn your back on the history of the wars launched and provoked to wipe the state of Israel off the map, to the terror she was and is subjected to, even as land was offered for peace? Or will you confront BDS and intersectionality on your college campuses when it holds Israel uniquely accountable for the region's ills, while remaining silent as her enemies teach hatred to children? Will you be a witness to the anti-Semitism that lurks just beneath the double standards that are applied to Israel? And will you be a witness to the hope that my father represented through his words and actions? Will you be a witness to small acts of kindness in your immediate life, as well as the larger ones needed on the world stage? Will you teach your children how to be witnesses themselves, how to tell a bully from a victim, and how to stand up to a bully when sides must be taken? I will be a witness. I'm here today with my first cousins, Steve and Sydney, and we are witnesses that we are standing in the place where my father and mother's families were sent to die from Siget and Lvov simply because they were Jews, packed like animals for the slaughter onto the train while their neighbors watched. I'm a witness to history and to a generation of heroes, to the veterans of the Allied forces who liberated these camps and put themselves in harm's way to break the grasp of fascism. I am a witness to my father's deep and undying connection to his people and to his belief in our collective humanity, regardless of ethnicity or borders. And I'm a witness to my children, who brought so much joy to their grandfather, to my son, in whom my father's gentle soul lives on, and to my daughter, exactly 9 years old today, whose soul throws off the brilliance of 1,000 suns. Her name, Sipora, bears witness to a little girl of the same age, my father's sister, who was sent to the flames here 73 years ago. Each Friday night, we light the candles, we sing the songs, we welcome in the Shabbat together, and my wife and I, once again, become witnesses that the enemy has failed. We become witnesses that Am Yisrael Chai, we, the Jewish people, live.
Gam kielech gates al mavet lo irara. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Ki ata imadi, for you are with me, for you are with me.
That was Eli Wiesel's son. Not the guitar player, the person speaking in Poland.
We rise for El Malay Rachamim.
El Malay Rachamim Shochen Bamramim Hamtzeh Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechina B'ma'alot kedoshim u'torim kezohar harakia mazirim et kol nishamot shel sheishes מיליוני היהודים, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, ושנספו על קידוש השם בידי המרצחים הגרמנים הנאצים ועוזריהם משאר העמים. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם בגן עדן תמנוחתם ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין.
Amen.
Amen. Yasher Koach. I know everybody just had a seat, but I invite you all to rise again in body or spirit as we count the Omer for this 12th day of the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefarat ha'omer
Hayom Shnei Masar Yom Shehem Shavua Echad V'Chamishim Yamim LaOmer. Blessed are you, Infinite One, our God, majestic ruler of all time and space, who makes us holy with your commandments, and commands us regarding the counting of the Omer. Today is 12 days, making 1 week and 5 days of the Omer. Amen.
Amen.
So, as I mentioned, today is the 12th day of the Omer, and today in community we observe Yom Hashoah. And so let's try to make meaning of these two observances and how they relate and interrelate to each other. How can today's Omer counting deepen our experience and bring more healing and transformation? So just briefly, this week as a whole is in our count. We focus on the attributes of Gevurah, which generally speaking is about strength and power. And Kabbalistically, we add to that the qualities of discernment, judgment, and boundary setting. In today's particular count, we're invited to pay attention to the nuance of Hod Sheba Gevurah. So Hod, in addition to our usual translations, which we find in the Siddur usually of splendor and glory, Hod is also about refining the qualities of humility and surrender and yielding. And so we can ask ourselves today, this day in particular, how is the Hod within our Gevurah? To say that in English words, that might make a little more sense. We could frame, there's many ways to frame the question, two possibilities. Do I have humility in my power and strength? We can ask ourselves, as a people, do we have humility in our power and strength? Another question, do I have boundaries when I yield and surrender? So it's interesting to ask these kinds of questions through the lens of where we find ourselves on the Jewish calendar. Day 12 of the Omer and Yom Hashoah, our observance. Typically counting the Omer is a mystical practice, one that's very internal and individual. And Yom Hashoah, on the other end, is a communal experience, a global experience. So how can we apply the count? To be humble and experience a poet is to yield to our feelings and to experience our grief. To be strong and boundaried, which is an experience of Gevurah, is to exercise control and discernment. And Yom Hashoah is a day that allows us to elevate and experience both of those principles. As we together, as we've already done, lean into the truth and the unthinkable details of today, we uncover overwhelming grief and new layers of unresolved trauma. Having a day on the calendar to do this in community is like a sacred container for us. Together we hold the grief and enter the truth and absorb the horrifying gravity of the Shoah. But we do it together in community. This gives us boundaries. We're not swimming in endless grief forever with no end. We're not swimming alone. We exercise discernment so that the nightmare of the Shoah does not swallow us. With discernment and strength, we resolve not to give in to despair. Part of how we do that is by sharing this experience together. By observing this day in community, this community, the larger Jewish community, the global community, and of course, the reality of the Shoah lives in our hearts and our minds every day. But on this day, we vow with the world to remember and say never again. We give particular voice and expression to the unspeakable today. We yield. We allow ourselves to dive into the details. We hear stories of survivors. Together we remember what happened. Having this container strengthens us and allows us to really feel without getting lost. With the marker of this day, we notice that each year we heal a little bit more as we remember and resolve together. Never again.
And now, my friends, please let us rise together as we remember the 6 million who died, whose time of death may not be known, or their place of death, or even their name. But they were our people, and we stand now to say the Kaddish together. Please join me while muted. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'golo v'zman kariv, v'imru amen. Yehesh me Rabba mivarach le'olam u'lamei ul'mayah. Yitporach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal. Shmei dekudesha b'richu. Leilal min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, amiron be'alma, v'imru amen. Yehesh shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayim tovim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Osei shalom bimramav, uyasei shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen.
Oseh shalom, oseh shalom.
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 Shalom. May the one who makes peace make peace for us, our people, and for all people who dwell on earth. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So one more beautiful quote from Etty Hillesum, who Rabbi Julie quoted earlier in our service, and who died at age 29 in Auschwitz. Before she was deported, she wrote, "How beautiful life really is. An inexplicable feeling. It has no anchor in reality in which we now live. But surely there are also realities other than those one reads about in the paper and hears in the thoughtless and inflamed talk of frightened people. There is also the reality of the small rosy cyclamen and of the wide horizon one can keep on rediscovering behind all the noise and confusion of the times." Her words, her writings were compiled into a book called An Interrupted Life. It is very, very beautiful. I recommend it for you to explore. She's an amazing woman.
Thank you. So Rabbi Emmanuel sent me this video that I hadn't seen in several years, and it's just a perfect ending to end, of course, on Hatikva, but to hear it as it was sung in Bergen-Belsen in probably 1945.
The day I reached Belsen concentration camp, the 5th day of liberation, was a Friday, the day before the Jewish Sabbath. Something like half the surviving prisoners at Belsen were Jews, and the Jewish champion for the British Second Army, the Reverend L.H. Hartman, held an eve of the Sabbath service in the open air in the midst of the camp. It was the first Jewish service that many of the men and women present had taken part in for 6 years. It was probably the first Jewish service held on German soil, in absolute security and without fear, for a decade. Around us lay the corpses that there had not been time to clear away, even after 5 days. 40,000 or more had been cleared, but there were still 1,000 or 2,000 around. People were still lying down and dying in broad daylight in front of our eyes. This was the background to this open-air Jewish service.
During the service, a few hundred people gathered together, were
sobbing openly, with joy at their liberation, with sorrow the memory of their parents and brothers and sisters that had been taken from them and gassed and burned. These people knew they were being recorded. They wanted the world to hear their voice. They made a tremendous effort, which quite exhausted them. Listen.
Thank you, Alan.
Yisrael Chai, the children of Israel still liveth.
Wow, that piece of film I have never seen before, from Bergen-Belsen, from the day it was liberated.
Am Yisrael Chai. The children of Israel still liveth. So on behalf of Temple Emek Shalom and Chavra Shir Chadash and Congregation Beth Israel, it's been an honor for our three congregations to come together, to cry a little, to hear testimony, hopefully to end with a little bit of hope together. Thank you.
Thanks for listening with me, and have a good day, everyone.